Hello and good evening. My name's Don Arleth, and you're watching World News Tonight, live from Warsaw. With a single signature, 25 years of negotiations are over. The European Union has sealed an agreement with the Mercosur countries. Who stands to gain and lose as a result of the deal? We'll have more on this in the program, but first, the latest headlines. Donald Trump threatens European countries with tariffs over Greenland. Zelenskyy warns people are losing faith in diplomacy as peace talks are set to resume in the United States. And social media ban for children. Poland may follow Australia's lead, but there's one difference. More than a quarter century in the making, the EU-Mercosur trade deal has finally crossed the finish line. Today, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen signed the landmark agreement. But after years of protests and political backlash, its promise of a win-win is far from universally accepted. As Europe bets big on free trade and multilateralism, the real question is who will truly benefit once the ink is dry? Konrad Gorlinski reports.
European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and European Council President Antonio Costa arrived in Paraguay's capital Asunción on Saturday to sign one of the world's most mammoth trade deals. Well over 25 years in the making, the EU-Mercosur trade deal is finally moving ahead. The signing ceremony, hosted by Paraguayan President Santiago Peña, was attended by key leaders from both blocs, although Brazilian President Lula da Silva was notably absent. This while massive protests continue across Europe, particularly farmers. Europe's leaders, however, assure that the deal will be a win-win, not just for Europe and South America, but for multilateralism and the rules-based world order that is under severe threat at the moment.
This is phenomenal. And this agreement sends a very strong message to the world. It reflects a clear and deliberate choice. We choose fair trade over tariffs. We choose a productive, long-term partnership over isolation.
Mercosur is a customs union of 4 major South American emerging economies, rich in natural resources and with a combined GDP of almost $3 trillion. The largest member, Brazil, makes up the bulk of that, followed by Argentina, Uruguay, and Paraguay. The remainder of the continent are also associated members of the bloc. In 2024, EU-Mercosur trade amounted to roughly €111 billion. That year, exports from the EU equaled roughly $55 billion, while imports stood at $56. A slight imbalance in favor of Mercosur, and there is a risk that this imbalance may grow. Between 2014 and 2024, the EU's imports from Mercosur grew by over 50%, while its exports only grew half that much, a trend not likely to change anytime soon. Mercosur's biggest exports to the EU were agricultural products, mineral products, and pulp and paper, 80% of which came from Brazil. The EU's top exports to Mercosur included machinery and appliances, chemicals and pharmaceutical products, and transport equipment.
We'll not limit ourselves to the eternal role of commodity exporters. We want to produce and sell higher value-added industrial goods.
Farmers, particularly in Poland, France, and Ireland, are worried that agricultural goods from Brazil and Mercosur will flood European markets, bringing down prices, nullifying their already tight margins, and putting them out of business. Governments assure them, however, that necessary safeguards are in place.
My government has managed to introduce a safeguard clause. In fact, farmers' interests are now largely protected.
There are to be import quotas set on certain products and requirements on producers to meet EU fertilizer and pesticide regulations, but experts warn that this may be easier said than done.
There are these, what we call the safeguard clause, the safeguard safety clauses, and the European Union said it was the good solution to avoid the pesticides to come to Europe. But actually, when you look at the World Trade Organization, there are so many rules that we have to respect, so it's not that simple.
Ursula von der Leyen has allocated €45 billion in emergency funds to appease farmers for the time being.
All the free trade agreements, such as this one is a classic one, are such asymmetrical in nature. So some industries win, some loses. And depending on the structure of your industry, there is different winners and losers. For Germany, which small agriculture sector and heavy industry and machinery, automotive industry and chemical, that will be winners.
As Europe's trade relationship with the U.S. sours and its trade deficit with China increases, the bloc has had to make a choice.
I think it's not a surprise that the European Union is seeking some new markets for European exporters because, as a bloc, as the organization, the European Union is the largest exporter in the world.
The European Commission expects an estimated 39% increase in annual exports to Mercosur following the deal. For TVP World, I'm Conrad Gorlinski.
Photograph of this great day.
A sweeping and incendiary statement from Donald Trump has reignited tensions over Greenland, trade, and global security. Accusing Denmark and several European allies of posing a risk to world peace, Trump is now threatening escalating tariffs unless Greenland is sold to the United States. Starting on February 1st, the countries that just sent troops to Greenland will be charged a 10% tariff on any and all goods shipped to the United States. If nothing changes, on June 1st, this tariff will be increased to 25%.
We have subsidized Denmark and all of the countries of the European Union and others for many years by not charging them tariffs or any other forms of remuneration. Now, after centuries, it is time for Denmark to give back. World peace is at stake. China and Russia want Greenland, and there is not a thing that Denmark can do about it. They currently have 2 dog sleds as protection, one added recently. Only the United States of America, under President Donald Trump, can play in this game, and very successfully at that. Nobody will touch this sacred piece of land, especially since the national security of the United States and the world at large is at stake. On top of everything else, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, France, Germany, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands and Finland have journeyed to Greenland for purposes unknown. This is a very dangerous situation for the safety, security and survival of our planet.
There are no pressing security threats to Greenland, a group of U.S. lawmakers said just hours ago. The bipartisan delegation from the U.S. Senate met with the authorities of both Greenland and Denmark. Their visit was accompanied by mass protests against Donald Trump's expansionist policies. Alex Zelenskyy has the story.
Donald Trump has repeatedly spoken of the need for the United States to take over Greenland. The reason? National security.
We are going to do something on Greenland, whether they like it or not, because if we don't do it, Russia or China will take over Greenland.
Now a delegation of American senators is in Denmark, arguing, contrary to the American president's assertion, that Greenland is safe.
There are no pressing security threats to Greenland, but we share real concern about Arctic security going forward. As the climate changes, as the sea ice retreats, as shipping routes change, there are legitimate reasons for us to explore ways to invest better in Arctic security broadly, both in the American Arctic and in our NATO partners and allies.
The bipartisan delegation of lawmakers met the leaders of Denmark and Greenland in Copenhagen on Friday, seeking to lower the temperature with assurances of congressional support. And that temperature is running high, as thousands of protesters gathered in Copenhagen on Saturday to show support for Greenland, as U.S. President Donald Trump continues to threaten to seize the Arctic territory.
So we have lots of families in Greenland. Greenland is our country.
Denmark's Joint Arctic Command, General Søren Andersen, said on Friday that no Chinese or Russian ships had been sighted off the coast of Greenland, contradicting the point repeatedly made by U.S. President Donald Trump. The general also announced that he had invited U.S. troops to participate in exercises on the island.
I've been commander up here for 2.5 years. I haven't seen any Russia or Chinese combat ships up here. We see, of course, that China and Russia is working together in the Arctic Ocean.
European nations this week sent small numbers of military personnel to the island at Denmark's request. German soldiers were seen disembarking a Polish plane there on Saturday morning. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk said Poland was not planning to join the European military deployment to Greenland, but warned that any U.S. military intervention there would mean the end of the world as we know it. Alex Zemlinsky, TVP World.
As the full-scale war in Ukraine is about to enter its fifth year, President Zelenskyy is warning that people are losing faith in diplomacy as peace talks are set to resume in the United States. Now let's go to our correspondent in Kyiv, Oz Chatterjee. Good evening, Oz. So what are the expectations for this latest round of talks in the United States, and will Ukraine get the U.S. to sign off on security guarantees?
Well, this is the big question. The Ukrainians are heading, they've arrived in the United States for further consultations on what those security guarantees would entail. The Ukrainians say they're ready to sign a deal with the Americans. Now, this delegation headed by Kirill Budanov, Zelensky's new chief of staff, Rustem Umerov, head of the National Security Council, and David Arakhamia, chair of the Servant of the People party, that's Zelensky's ruling party here in Ukraine, heading to America for talks with the delegation, including Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner, and U.S. military leaders as well. So talks really focused on the security guarantee aspect of this, but there are still big question marks over what this deal would entail if it is signed from the Ukrainians, and what it would entail if the Russians were to sign it, particularly those question marks about nuclear power, the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, and also the situation, the status of the Donetsk and Luhansk regions that Russia wants Ukraine to withdraw from in its entirety. Ukrainians still not wanting to do that. Recent polling also in Ukraine show that a majority of Ukrainians would oppose such a move, even if U.S. security guarantees were to be offered to Ukraine in exchange for those territories. Now, President Zelenskyy released a statement on Saturday about those talks. Here's what he had to say.
Today, the Ukrainian delegation is already in the United States. Rustem Umerov, Kirill Budanov, and David Arakhamia. Closer to evening, Kyiv time, I expect the first reports on the meetings. The main task of the Ukrainian delegation is to provide reliable information on current events and the impact of Russian strikes. Among the consequences of this terror is the discrediting of the diplomatic process. People are losing faith in diplomacy, and Russian attacks constantly reduce even the limited opportunities for dialogue that existed so far. The American side must understand this. Progress is also needed on the documents that were being prepared.
Now, on the domestic front, Ukraine is still experiencing that state of emergency when it comes to power. More troublingly, Andrei Sybiha, the country's foreign minister, has warned that Ukraine has received intelligence that Russia is planning more large-scale attacks against Ukraine's energy infrastructure, but critically, energy infrastructure which powers Ukraine's remaining nuclear power plants, which risks a meltdown and cutting Ukraine off from vitally needed electricity supplies in the country. So another worrying sign on the cards, potentially in the coming days. Back to you, Don.
All right, Oz Chatterjee reporting there from Kyiv. Thank you for the update. Rumors of low morale and mass desertion have overshadowed Ukraine's war effort for many months now. But now, for the first time, the government is putting numbers to the crisis. Newly appointed Defense Minister Mikhailo Fedorov has revealed a staggering manpower shortfall that threatens the front lines. The question is no longer whether Ukraine has a problem, but how much time it has to fix it. Anastasia Yanchenko has the details.
Зачем ви таке робите?
Rumors of low moral and high desertion have long circulated, but newly appointed Defense Minister Mikhailo Fedorov is the first Ukrainian official to reveal the full scale of the problem.
I don't want to be a populist, I want to be realistic. The Ministry of Defense I'm taking over has a deficit of €6 billion, with 2 million Ukrainians wanted by the authorities and 200,000 absent without leave.
Ukrainian men aged 25 to 60 are eligible for military service. Since the start of the full-scale war, thousands have fled abroad, many illegally. Of the roughly 3.7 million men of conscription age remaining in Ukraine, voluntary enlistment accounts for just 10%.
The enemy is advancing precisely due to a shortage of personnel, especially in infantry units.
Experts say the situation is also warranted by August easing of travel restrictions, which allowed men 18 to 22 to leave the country. Around 100,000 have done so since.
It was a major mistake to open the borders for 18 to 22-year-olds, as this group consists of young men dependent on their parents and encouraged to leave the country, with the majority not planning to return.
Desertion has surged from about 200 cases a month in 2023 to roughly 2,700 in 2025. To fill manpower gaps, Ukraine mobilizes around 30,000 troops monthly. But the process has become increasingly controversial. Reports of forced conscription known as bussification have raised serious questions about fairness and legality.
There are basically no good solutions here. The question on the scales is, who suffers more? The one who's being detained or the infantryman who can't leave his position?
Experts say low voluntary enlistment and high desertion are likely to continue in Ukraine due to low pay. Rare soldiers earn around 400–500 euros a month, while frontline troops make about 2,000, roughly the same as young soldiers in Germany. By contrast, Russia has mobilized more than 400,000 personnel in 2025 alone, thanks to high financial incentives.
The war will not end tomorrow or even in the next few months. To attract the 2 million people Fedorov has spoken about, Ukraine must offer them the opportunity to earn 5 to 10 times more, along with proper financial support and benefits.
Manpower issues have pushed Ukraine's military tech development to the top of the country's priority list. Ukraine is already a global leader in drone technology, and that focus will continue.
More robots means fewer losses. More technology means fewer deaths. The lives of Ukrainian heroes are of the highest value.
Anastasia Yanchenko, TVP World.
As Iran's crackdown on protesters intensifies, Reza Pahlavi told the international press on Friday that the country has reached a pivotal turning point and urged the world to act in support of the Iranian people. Today, a rally in Warsaw demonstrated solidarity with Iran's fight for freedom. Kazimierz Wysiak was there and has this report.
Demonstrations in Iran may have calmed down, but demonstrations of support across the world, including here in Warsaw, are still taking place. As you can see, dozens of protesters have gathered here. What you can see here are the pictures, the faces of hundreds of protesters in Iran who were killed by the regime of the Islamic Republic, led by Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. Let's go talk with one of the protesters here. Hello, sir. Can you tell me why are you here today?
Because the regime, the dictatorship regime in Iran is killing my people. I've not been in touch with my family for more than 7 days. Nobody here doesn't know if their families are alive or no. So it's time to put a stop on it and just free Iran. That's why we are here demonstrating our power of all the Iranians, and with the support of the Polish people and all the people around the world, we will get rid of this regime.
Now, protests inside Iran seem to have calmed down for now. Do you think they will continue? Do you know what's happening there?
I don't know what's happening there because it's a full digital shutdown, but I'm telling you that nothing is not calm. It is fire under the ash.
This protest saw calls for the return of exiled Prince Reza Pahlavi and action from the United States. Donald Trump recently backed down from his threat of military strikes against the regime.
We are standing against a regime that is shooting bare-handed protesters. So something is needed, some help is needed to help us defend this force.
Many of these protesters are covering their faces to protect their families. Others are past that point. All of them are crucial sources of information on what's going on inside the country.
A very close friend of mine last night called me through landline. She just wanted to let us know that she's alive and a curfew is going on. So if people are outside their homes after sunset, they're being asked to go back with a gun pointing to their heads.
Things get emotional fast, and it's no wonder. Their friends and families are under constant threat of imprisonment or death. As they watch a traditional Iranian dance, they hope to one day return to a free homeland.
The Iranians living abroad are the voice of those who are literally dying in the country of Iran from the hands of the regime. From Warsaw, Kazimierz Łysiak, TVP World.
From the Pacific to Europe, governments are tightening the rules on how young people use social media, and Poland may be next, as lawmakers prepare possible restrictions for under 15s. The debate intensifies over whether these platforms are shaping young minds in ways we are only just beginning to understand. Aisha Abachi has more.
Australia did it. Malaysia is doing it. France, Spain, Italy, and Denmark are discussing it. And now Poland may be joining the club of countries banning social media for teens.
We follow Australia's example. That means we expect big tech companies not to allow children access to harmful content that is available on their platforms, essentially any content, unless they choose to verify it. This is exactly what Australia introduced in December. The difference is that we consider 16 years of age excessive. We believe that 15 is a reasonable threshold.
Poland's centrist ruling coalition is expected to prepare a parliamentary bill by the end of February.
I believe that children under the age of 15 should be supervised by their parents and also have less access to social media.
The Minister of Education says these solutions are necessary to protect young people from online threats.
As a father, I think this ban is the right thing to do. Children should have access to specific content, not just any content. I think up to 18, not even up to 15.
Even if, quote, it may arouse a lot of emotions.
Freedom is a top value for all people in Europe. There should be freedom. As soon as you try to limit that, that's going wrong.
No one wants to be deprived of means of contact with their peers.
But why is there such a strong common belief that social media is harmful to young children?
The younger someone is when they start using social media, the greater the risk that it will negatively affect their mental health. The growing wave of mental health disorders among young people is largely linked to how social media affects the brain itself. Not even the content at first. Content is a secondary factor. The primary issue is how quickly the brain receives pleasure while scrolling, and how difficult it then becomes to find satisfaction in everyday activities.
A recent report by NASK, Poland's National Institute on Computer Science Research, found that Polish children are starting their digital journeys at an increasingly early age. As many as 40% of children receive a smartphone before their 9th birthday, and the internet is becoming a daily part of their lives. They spend an average of nearly 5 hours a day online.
People don't want to talk to each other, they're just in their echo chambers, and I think social media makes it all worse.
I don't think if you're too young, it wouldn't be an attack to your freedom. You have better stuff to do than being on social media.
Social media content is not adequately filtered, it is not adapted for children to see, and it is impossible to filter it in such a way that inappropriate content is unavailable to children.
World leaders have talked for years about restricting children's access to social media. Now the talk is crystallizing into action. For TVP World, I'm Aisha Badja.
As freezing temperatures persist, Ukraine endures a major energy crisis after Russian strikes left tens of thousands in Kyiv without power, heat, or water. While services are gradually being restored, emergency imports are set to increase. Meanwhile, a Ukrainian delegation has departed for the United States to meet with Witkoff and Kushner, aiming to secure a binding U.S. security guarantee. Now joining us here to discuss the latest concerning Ukraine and more is Roland Freudenstein, co-founder of the Brussels Freedom Hub. Hello, sir, and thank you so much for joining us on World News Tonight.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
Yes, now, Ukraine is facing one of its worst energy crises yet due to the Russian attacks, and authorities are warning of more Russian attacks on the energy grid. Do you believe that if this continues at this pace, that we could see a total collapse in some areas of the Ukrainian energy grid? And what would this do to the morale and the people of Ukraine?
It's very difficult to predict. I mean, until this winter, Ukraine has been absolutely remarkably resilient, reacting flexibly, repairing infrastructure, having generators, small mobile generators and all this. It seems like this winter is different, but honestly, I can't really imagine that Ukraine and its resilience and its will to defend its freedom and its existence is faltering now. There is a limit to what Russia can politically achieve with these attacks. I think it strengthens the resolve of the Ukrainians.
Kyiv has run out of air defense missiles, leaving critical infrastructure vulnerable to attack. President Zelenskyy has announced a major air defense package, but without disclosing where the package came from. Is the U.S. slowly moving away from even supplying weapons to Ukraine, even if Europe pays for them? And can Europe fill that void?
Well, that's the big fear now also in the latest Greenland crisis between the Europeans and the US. But I really have to emphasize that there are formidable domestic obstacles to Trump completely withdrawing support from Ukraine. I think in that case, he would have not only the Democrats in Congress acting against him, but actually some of his own people. We've seen that over the last couple of months, and that is something Trump has to reckon with. So I don't see him taking this decision as yet.
According to President Macron, France now supplies Kyiv with 75% of its intelligence, which was primarily supplied by Washington. Is this maybe proof that Europe can increase its military capabilities in a faster time frame than previously thought?
Well, intelligence is one thing. Military hardware is something different. I think we are in a dangerous bottleneck when it comes to ammunition. In other words, actual missiles for air defense. But when it comes to intelligence, and Macron's statement is amazing, actually. If it's true, if that really are the facts, then that takes away at least one threat that the US have actually repeatedly made vis-a-vis Ukraine and the Europeans by implication. So difficult to say, but I think that the military hardware situation is more serious. But there I would go back to what I just said before. I don't see the US cutting off the delivery of military hardware bought by the Europeans for Ukraine.
Another major problem the Ukraine is facing that we've heard for many months now is the manpower problems that it is having and the effect that that's having on the front lines. We've seen reports of up to 200,000 people abandoning their positions. And of course, mobilization is very difficult right now in Ukraine. Do you foresee, if this problem isn't fixed immediately or very soon, that Ukraine could lose even more territory in the east?
Yes, that's the big fear. But there are actually things that can be done. I mean, one news item that we heard in the last couple of days was actually Ukraine very successfully replacing manpower by robots. And I'm not talking about drones. I'm talking about ground-based robots with machine guns. And that is already one prospect. The other one is a reform of military training. I mean, it's a bit complicated to explain, but to cut a long story short, I think by reforming military training, putting younger officers in charge of basic training, Ukraine could do a lot to keep people deserting after military training, because that is where most of the desertions are taking place at the moment.
Okay, before we run out of time here, I'd like to change the subject a little bit. Trump is hitting the UK and other EU countries with a 10% tariff over their stance on Greenland. How do you see this scenario playing out? And is there a possibility that the NATO alliance falls apart as a result of everything we're seeing from President Trump?
Yeah, I mean, again, this is the big fear at the moment in Europe. I believe that the transatlantic crisis over Greenland is the biggest immediate concern at the moment in Brussels. First of all, there's going to be a unified reaction to these tariffs against individual countries. The European Union will most likely threaten an escalation on its side. In other words, they want to respond in kind with their own tariffs against the US if the US tariffs are actually enacted. So far, we only have announcements. Second, what's happening is that Norway and the UK are completely on the side of the other Europeans. In other words, this is the European Union plus. Trump is actually undoing Brexit in a way. And third, what's really amazing is the first reactions of Europe's national populists have been very critical of Trump and very much in the way of unity and on a unified response to these threats. So that is really amazing. Populists are now getting on board with a European response. And last, I would say, Europe will have to continue to cooperate with US Congress in order to get some bipartisan majority of senators and Congress people to somehow stop these crazy aggressive acts by the president.
Okay, Roland Freudenstein, co-founder of Brussels Freedom Hub, thank you so much for this very interesting conversation. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
And that concludes this edition of World News Tonight. Thank you for joining us. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you next time. Good night.